1 in every 5 women lives with a disability. That is over 700 million women and girls living with disabilities worldwide. Women and girls living with disabilities are 3 times more at risk from sexual assault. They are also twice as likely to experience other forms of violence than non-disabled women. On a daily basis, stigma, discrimination, and harmful gendered norms put women and girls living with disabilities at intersecting forms of violence. In 2018, the UN Trust Fund launched a special funding window to support civil society and women's rights organizations working to end violence against women and girls living with disabilities. Over the course of the funding window between 2018 and 2020, over 28,500 women and girls with disabilities directly benefited from UN Trust Fund funded projects. In 2022 alone, UN Trust Fund grantee organizations changed the lives of nearly 14,000 women and girls living with disabilities by leading various initiatives, from prevention to maintaining and improving quality specialist support services to institutional changes.
Mislim da sam tu dosta nekako napredovala i prenela poruku nekim drugim ženama. Nju sam ojačala, jednu devojku, da može sama da traži nešto što joj treba i da se bori za svoje prava.
Uno de los resultados más importantes ha sido
One of the most important results has been the visibility of the situation of women with disabilities in Peru before the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women.
Had surveyed 650 women with disabilities to assess their needs during the COVID-19 crisis.
The role of civil society and women's rights organizations in ensuring the safety, dignity, and freedom of women and girls living with disabilities is undeniable. But only a collective action can deliver systemic solutions. Join the UN Trust Fund in collectively supporting and empowering organizations leading transformative change by and for women and girls whose voices deserve to be heard, whose participation is key to achieving sustainable development goals. Join us in leaving no woman or girl behind. Not today, not ever.
Thank you so much for that inspiring video. I would like to welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, maybe good evening to all of you who are both here and online. My name is Abigail Erickson, and I'm the Chief of the Trust Fund. And once again, I'm very pleased to welcome you here today for our webinar. We are holding this webinar in a hybrid format for those who are in town for the first in-person post-COVID CSW 67. This is actually my first CSW, so it's been extremely interesting. And of course, we have many of you in the online format who were not able to travel to New York for the CSW. It's really wonderful. I mean, the room is quite packed here for those of you online, so it's great to see so many people in the room together. And also, I think I will acknowledge, and I'm sure many of us would acknowledge, that we're grateful for technology, because I think one of the things that COVID-19 has done is brought much more technology to us that helps us to bridge time zones and geographies, keeping us more and more connected. I am responsible for some of the housekeeping, so let me go through that. All participants who are joining online are on mute to avoid audio issues during the presentation portion of the meeting. So please feel free to use the answer and question function on the chat. Kindly note that this meeting is being recorded and we might use this for external communication purposes. We're also live tweeting during the event, so you can find us on Twitter at UN Trust Fund EVA. And please do engage with us and keep this very important conversation moving and carrying on beyond this webinar. So really, our objective for today's meeting is to create a platform during the most important annual gathering that CSW represents for gender equality advocates across sectors and the globe. for lifting up the voices of women and girls with disabilities and organizations that are working with and for women and girls with disabilities. Let me say the UN Trust Fund deeply, deeply recognizes the strength, the expertise, and perspectives of women and girls with disabilities. And we are committed to inclusive partnerships and delivering upon our principle of leaving no woman or girl behind. Not today and not any day, as the video had said. This webinar is really an opportunity for us to have an open dialogue, an open conversation among our partner civil society organizations and women's rights organizations to share lessons learned from your work to empower and support women and girls living with disabilities. And at the same time, it's an opportunity for us here at the Trust Fund to share our insights and our reflections on our unique positionality in this space. As always, our lessons are informed by civil society and women's rights voices, knowledge, expertise, and working to make sure that all women and girls everywhere can live free from violence. The video that we watched at the opening is just a small glimpse into the complex reality of the structural barriers women and girls with disabilities face. And I would say the inspiring resilience and creativity of so many in breaking down these barriers to build a more just, safe, and equal world for all women and girls. I hope the stories of today's esteemed panelists and researchers will help us think more critically around the intersections of women and girls' lived realities and provide concrete ideas and tools for strategizing, for resistance, for positive action, and for global solidarity. So I'm really looking forward to the rest of the webinar. I will now hand over to my dear colleague, Anna, who will provide you with a broader introduction and will moderate this webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abby, and welcome to colleagues in the room and those online, and a special welcome and thanks to our amazing panelists today. I'm Anna Alashevsky, the Acting Grants and Program Manager for the UN Trust Fund, and I'm also the Trust Fund's lead on disability inclusion and intersectionality. I'd like to start by saying a few words about the Trust Fund's work in this area. The Trust Fund has long funded projects which work to end violence against women and girls with disabilities, though in recent years we've engaged in more intentional efforts to prioritize the allocation of funding to women and girls facing violence and discrimination due to intersecting aspects of their identities. In this regard, we've placed a special focus on trying to ensure that our grant giving is more inclusive by prioritizing funding to projects which take an intersectional approach. The Trust Fund, however, has also placed a focus on specific intersections or specific groups of women and girls in a particular time or place where a need is identified. As mentioned in the video, in 2018, in recognition of the chronic underfunding of this issue and the particular and additional risks women and girls with disabilities face, the Trust Fund launched this special window to fund projects in this area and has since funded 22 three-year projects which focus on addressing violence against women and girls with disabilities in 20 countries in all world regions for almost $10 million. Although these projects were selected through a competitive process, we saw a really great range of strategies employed throughout them, from empowerment work with individual women to work to change social norms, improve access to justice and services, and support more inclusive movement building, change laws and policies, and so on, which all provide amazing scope for us to learn from. These projects have almost all come to an end now, and I'm delighted that we're here today to launch a report of the lessons that we've learned from this portfolio. This report is actually the first of 3 to be launched this year by the Trust Fund, and this is part of our learning journey towards disability inclusion and intersectionality. In our program today, we'll hear an overview of findings from this review. We'll also be hearing from partner organizations who were funded under the special window to reflect on how these issues surface through their own projects. We'll then have a little bit of time for questions and answers, and please do add any questions or comments in the chat at any point during the event, and time allowing, we'll try to return to these if we have time at the end when we've heard from our speakers. I'm delighted now to introduce our panel today. Firstly, and with us in the room is Jackie Bartenge. Jackie is a project coordinator at Women Challenge to Challenge, an organization of women with disabilities in Kenya. Jackie has been doing tremendous work in mobilizing and empowering women with disabilities with information on their rights and advocating for their inclusion in women's rights movements and disability movements at local and international levels. Welcome, Jackie. Kefa Agukosh is joining us online today. She's the Executive Director of Stars of Hope Society for the Empowerment of Women and Girls with Disabilities, the only organization in Palestine that represents and defends the rights of women and girls with disabilities. Kefa is a key actor and strong advocate and an active member of a number of national networks and forums. Biplapi Shrestha is a program director at the Asian Pacific Resource and Research Center for Women, or ARROW. ARROW, a global South feminist organization based in Malaysia, works towards an equal, just, and equitable world that enables women and young people to realize their full sexual and reproductive health rights. Biplapi manages ARROW's multi-country program, which builds constituencies with new alliances to develop knowledge and ownership of gender feminism and sexual and reproductive health and rights issues. Also in the room today is Anibal Cabrera Echeverria, the Executive Director of Coordinadora por los Derechos de la Infancia y de Adolescencia, a network of 30 civil society organizations working to defend, promote, and monitor children's human rights in Paraguay. Finally, online is Dr. Elizabeth Leroux, or Lisa. Lisa is a South African researcher with more than 15 years' experience of working within the international development sphere. To date, she's delivered a range of evaluation and formative research projects in 24 countries in 4 continents, with a particular focus on violence against women and girls, gender equality, women's participation, and a critical lens on the important role of religion and culture. Welcome again, and thank you to both those in the room and online. I'm going to ask Lisa to kick off our program. Lisa, with Dr. Selina Palm, authored the synthesis review of lessons learned from the Trust Fund's special funding window, which was created with grantee partners of the UN Trust Fund. We'll now hear from Lisa, who will present key findings from the synthesis review. Lisa, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna, and hi, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to give you an overview of the synthesis review research that I did with my colleague, Selina Palm. You can go to the next slide, please. You can see all 22 of the grantees involved in the synthesis review on this map on the screen. They were integral to the research process, and we couldn't have done it without them. So just thank you so much to all 22. Maybe to give all of you a feel for the 22 grantees, of the 22 organizations, 4 identify as disability-specific organizations, 3 are women's rights organizations, 5 are organizations of women with disabilities, 1 is a faith-based organization, 1 is a human rights organization, and then the 1 is a child rights network. The work of 16 grantees included all types of disabilities, while the rest focused on a particular disability only. Next slide, please. Now, I will be discussing the 5 themes, the key themes that emerge from the review. And while I'll discuss them separately, this visual representation that you see on the screen shows that they're also deeply interconnected in projects that address violence against women and girls with disabilities. Now, if you look at the screen, and it's quite a detailed representation, so I invite you to go and take a look at the report and look at it in more detail. The portfolio as a whole showed us that interventions that address violence against women and girls with disabilities, they need to fundamentally center the agency and the participation of women and girls with disabilities. This agency and participation is like the overall environment within which the other 4 elements are made present or made absent. So the other 4 elements are, just in short, flexible adaptation and learning, prioritizing collaboration, engaging legal and policy systems, and then enabling mindset shift. And while agency and participation of women and girls with disabilities forms the environment that enables these 4 elements to be most effective, these 4 also in turn reinforce the agency and participation of women and girls with disabilities. So there's this mutuality in it all. But now let us chat a bit more about the 5 key interlinked themes. Next slide, please. Now, the first theme is around collaboration, and it emerged as a crucial element to both the success of programming on violence against women and girls with disabilities, and for working at the challenging intersections of gender, disabilities, and violence. So both formal and informal partnerships were a requirement to apply for and secure and implement a trust fund grant, and different types of collaborations emerged across the portfolio. But importantly, what we see is the importance of partnering with local organizations of people with disabilities. They were crucial to project implementation, for they have existing strong links and good reach in the targeted communities. At the same time, they were also influencing other partners' understanding of disability. And that was critically important because it helped these partners recognize the importance of integration and inclusion of persons with disabilities longer term. Next slide, please. Now, second key theme that grantees highlighted was around the key role that they were playing in shifting mindsets around how women and girls with disabilities are viewed, and whether the gender disabilities intersection is even recognized. So this is at community level, but also with service providers, also at national level with politicians and policymakers. The reality remains that violence against women and girls with disabilities frequently remains invisible, trivialized, or just dismissed. And as a result, grantees really had to work to shift these patterns of denial. And they did it in 4 main ways. So awareness raising on the nature and extent of the specific violence experienced by women and girls with disabilities, by transforming the mindset of specific groups within society, so working with the police or working with caregivers, by facilitating shifts towards new ways of approaching disabilities, and then 4, by producing and disseminating new knowledge resources. Next slide, please. Now, third theme is around participation, and I also spoke about this when we were looking at the visual representation. Participation was identified as incredibly important and relevant for women and girls with disabilities, because they're not only often left behind in development work, but they're so frequently also left out of everyday community activities and discussion. So meaningful participation through involving women and girls with disabilities in design and implementation emerged as instrumentally valuable in improving all of the strategies adopted by a program. However, that participation was in itself valuable because it helped to counter these underlying social stigmas. For example, that women and girls with disabilities are perceived as having a lack of agency or a lack of ability to participate or have inferior social status. Next slide, please. Then we saw that engaging at the wider systems level around laws and policies emerges very important components of working on violence against women and girls with disabilities. So we identified in the portfolio 4 main tiers of systems level engagement. The first was around, we saw that grantees were advocating for new or changed laws and policies at national level. Then we saw second, that some were working to harmonize the existing legal regulations and government policies with new laws. 3, some were capacitating duty bearers like the police or health workers. And then 4, some grantees were providing legal accompaniment for individual women and girls with disabilities. But what we really saw is that many grantees worked simultaneously across all 4 levels, all 4 tiers. So that really showed how these system level strategies often intersect in practice. Next slide, please. Now, the grantee participants emphasize that working on disabilities means that new understanding and insight was constantly emerging, requiring programmatic adaptation. So while they were implementing, they were learning and understanding more what is needed. So they were constantly adapting their programming in different ways. And then, of course, COVID-19, which affected all of the grantees and required adaptation. Now, key lessons that were learned from these adaptations included that projects working with women and girls with diverse disabilities cannot plan too far ahead without risking making these stereotypical or inaccurate assumptions around what women and girls with disabilities actually want and require. Second, they found that for adaptations to be appropriate, robust meal processes are needed. 3, that agile adaptation is enabled by good communication by implementing partners, but also between funders and grantees. And then 4, they found that unforeseen challenges can actually lead to the improvement of programming and organizations. Next slide, please. So those were the 5 key themes that emerged, and I really do invite you to study the full report where you can see very textured, rich examples from the grantee context. Now, if we reflect on the special windows as a whole, we identified 5 valuable contributions that resulted from it. In hindsight, the special window came at such a good time. So it contributed to the wider momentum around ratifying the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And it helped translate these high-level political shifts into positive practical realities on the ground. Furthermore, when COVID struck, the special window was in a unique position to support grantees to respond and adapt. Second, the funding offered through the special window offered many grantees that are organizations of people with disabilities a unique opportunity to actually apply and qualify for funding. So the flexible nature of the funding also allowed the grantees to be responsive to their evolving understanding of disabilities. Third, reflecting on grantee experiences has highlighted a number of challenging tensions that can emerge when you work at this intersection between violence and gender and disabilities. For example, there's this tension between exclusively focusing all programming only on women and girls with disabilities versus taking an inclusive approach where women and girls with disabilities are just one of the many groups of women that you work with. Or the tension between focusing only on one type of disability versus working with women and girls with any type of disability. So the special window had enabled these tensions to be highlighted and emphasizes the need for more research to understand this better. 4, the special window enabled the rapid development of a better understanding of and evidence from programming with women and girls with disabilities, as well as a database of disability-specific curricula, tools, and materials. And then finally, by funding organizations of people with disabilities and women's rights organizations and women's development networks that work with women and girls with disabilities, it has meant that the special window contributed to the development of a more inclusive eValk space, one that recognizes violence against women and girls with disabilities as a form of violence against women and girls, but also draws practically on the expertise and contributions of organizations of people with disabilities. Now, please note that there are also 11 recommendations based on these learnings included in the synthesis review. I don't have the time to go over it now, but they're focused on 3 specific groups: the eValk sector, funders, and then the eValk research community. But please do go and read the report for those. And then again, thank you everyone, to the UN Trust Fund, to the 22 grantees for the opportunity to do this research with you, but also for the opportunity to speak with you all today. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you so much for your work on the synthesis review and for that brief but informative summary of findings, which teased out some really critical learnings and recommendations. We'll now hear from grantee partners around their own project learnings. Jackie, firstly, over to you. Your project focused on reducing violence against women and girls with disabilities and increasing conviction rates. Through project activities, you aim to develop the capacities of women and girls with disabilities to undertake many different roles in project implementations. As a result, I know that we've seen how women and girls you've worked with felt more empowered to speak out and access support services and justice. Can you tell us a little bit more about the results achieved and how the participation of women and girls with disabilities across these different levels was critical in their achievement?
Thank you. I must say that the project, excuse me, made a big impact on the confidence of women and girls with disability. And confidence might be a hard thing to measure, but the closeness that we have had with these women with disabilities over the years through this project has allowed us to see the change in women and girls with disability, especially in information, increase in information and knowledge, which over the years has translated to confidence and action. The success in courts we have had really depend on the knowledge that the women have gotten through the project, and we have seen improvement, increase in securing the evidence and their confidence to be able to speak out. Otherwise, these cases do not get close to the courts. And the confidence is also important because women with disabilities are 4 times more likely to experience abuse. They have lived most of their lives in stigma and discrimination because of disability, and apart from disability, even being a woman. So this makes their starting point concerning confidence levels very low, and this is where our project started. I'll give an example of Teresa, a woman with physical disability in Baringo County, whom we have seen grow in confidence over the project life. Teresa was going through physical violence by her husband, and she thought that it was okay for her to be beaten by her husband. And she's one of the women who believe that going through that kind of abuse is an expression of love from the partner. But now, through the knowledge empowerment workshops, Teresa is an empowered woman with disability who can speak out and demand for her rights. And she reported the violence to the police and made the decision to separate with her husband. And now Teresa is a champion of disability issues in Baringo County. Another one I'll give an example of is Sheila. Sheila is one of our partners in Migori County. She's one of the grassroots partners who have been really supportive in following up these cases of violence in Migori County. And she's now able to follow the cases together with her partners. We have the service providers whom we have worked with and are seeing the need to work together. And in this project particularly, we have taken a multi-sectoral approach where service providers and duty bearers need to work together to be able to efficiently and effectively follow up on these cases. So the service providers have really played a big role. We have the local partners who are doing an incredible job, like Sheila and the others, and in following up these cases. And I think there's need to support them even more with resources because it's them who are running up and down. We cannot really follow up on them in the office, but they go up and down, following up with the police officers, making sure that the evidence is not lost, because sometimes we lose the cases because of such small but very important things. So they are there to make sure that they follow up on these cases until they reach to the court. And again, the strategies that we have given them through the knowledge empowerment workshop to work with the service provider has really helped the women to be able to get the cases to see the light of day. So again, I say there's need to support these local partners in the very remote areas, because we have seen that the cases get lost mainly in the remote places where there are no resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jackie, and thanks for sharing those really inspiring stories, showing the impact on individual. And it's so interesting to hear that the growth of confidence of individual and women and girls had this domino impact in terms of change at other levels. Kefa, now I come to you. Your project was carried out in the West Bank and Gaza and aimed to improve access to essential, safe, and adequate multi-sectoral services for women and girls with disabilities. Central to the project were a number of formal and informal partnerships with policymakers, families of women and girls with disabilities, research organizations, and many others. Can you please unpack for us why these partnerships were critical, how they were leveraged towards the project goal, and what was the groundwork that needed to be done to enable all of this to come together? Over to you, Kefar. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, and for you and for the UN Trust Fund team for offering us this opportunity to talk about our experience. Before starting, it's important to explain that the EVAW systems and mechanisms in Palestine are multi-sectoral, as they are different relevant state and non-state actors operating and providing services under the national referral system to all women, including women with disabilities. The national referral system includes different state and non-state actors under its umbrella, including social development sector, the women's affairs sector, the health sector, and the police family protection sector, in addition to the justice sector. Different preliminary steps needed to be performed before the work on the ground phase, which includes different issues. For example, context analysis, knowledge, and data collection of violence against women and girls with disabilities to accurately understand and track the situation of violence against them. Lobbying, sensitization, and raise the awareness of EVAW service providers to increase their understanding and sense of adoption of the disability inclusion principles and approaches. This crucial step is profoundly important as the positive change of attitudes and willingness to change the decision maker is the entrance gate to any institutional and long-term change. Also, there was a need to prepare participatory advocacy and influencing plans and interventions with the participation, of course, of different disability and human rights actors, and including, of course, the women and girls with disabilities themselves. Sign strategic partnerships, agreements, and MOUs that reflect all aspects of cooperation. The work on the ground entailed different levels to ultimately increase the access of women and girls with disabilities to the EVAW services, where the Stars of Hope Society and our partner, Marsad, through Himaya projects, worked slowly and collectively with the key EVAW actors, including different levels. For one, it was build the long-term multi-sectoral work plans for corrections and development after conducting joint assessments, which was disability audits and interventions plans with the partners themselves. Build the capacities of the EVAW service providers at the different level, at the state and non-state level, through customizing different off-job and in-job trainings and coaching programs to increase the understanding and the adaptation of the disability inclusion principles. Accumulative disability inclusive and needs responsive adaptations and amendments of the laws, policies, systems, and mechanisms, including SOPs, manuals, and tools. It's important to highlight the key results achieved during the Himaya Project 1 and to be continued in Himaya 2, where there was it's important to gain influence at the national level to represent women with disabilities through membership in different relevant networks and committees to introduce and to localize in outreach change. And recently in 2022, we succeed in modifying the current national referral system to be inclusive for women with disabilities. And following the previous mentioned approaches, different partnerships were achieved with key actors, including Ministry of Justice, the Police Prosecution Office, Family Protection Unit, and the Ministry of Social Development through official MOUs. We aspire at حماية to achieve different facilitative and develop facilitative measures and bylaws for legal certification of sign language practitioners. Train staff members of the complaint units in the different ministries about an inclusive and accessible public complaint system and procedures. Deliver trainings and coaching for staff and counselors at the family, disability, and the child departments of the Ministry of Social Development to apply the revised referral procedures and protocols. Also, we hope to work collectively with the Public Prosecution Office to revise of current procedures of the different units, produce different audio-visual signs and publications, and develop a unified manual of procedures to ensure all of their units, mainly the family and gender units, to be more unified in terms of their inclusiveness of women and girls with disabilities needs. In short, to make sure that the modified national referral system is reflected into the different subsectors and to make sure that the sector's services are more disability inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kefa. Thanks for sharing how this really intricate web of partnerships was critical to creating sustainable change, and also that really substantial, detailed groundwork that's needed to bring partners on board and capacitate them fully to be able to fulfill their roles. Thank you. Iblabi, now over to you. Your project worked to empower women and girls with disabilities to realize their rights, and also promoted the implementation of laws related to violence against women and girls with disabilities. Can you please share with us how you've been able to mobilize local partners to advocate for the government to comply with its international commitments on gender and disability? What were the entry points to your work with the government around accountability? Why this approach, and what impact have you seen this had on legislation and policy? Thanks so much.
Thank you, Anna. So we started this initiative defending the rights of women and girls with disabilities with support from UNTF in 2020. It focuses on ending sexual and gender-based violence against women and girls with disabilities. And it is implemented in Bangladesh in partnership with Women with Disabilities in Development Foundation. And some of you met the representative from WDDF last week. It's in Bangladesh, and the local level interventions are focused in 10 union in 5 sub-districts of the country. So I will start with your question on entry point first, so which also serves as a context as we understand what's in the country, right? So the government of Bangladesh have signed on to or ratified different international commitments, such as CEDAW in 1985, 1984 that was ratified, CRPD in 2007. And of course, like, you know, we have SDGs, we have Beijing Platform for Action, as well as ICPD. But our other entry point was also the domestic laws and policies, which has the provisions of, which have provisions of prevention and services against violence against women. And there are actually lists, which I'm not going to go through at this point, but there are lists of laws and policies. However, there was a gap of implementation, as we know that we have in many of the countries. And our initiative really was to advocate for the accountability from the governments to implement these.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm just being asked if you could slow down just a little bit for our interpreters. Thank you so much.
No worries. Also, in order for us to do this advocacy, we employed a multi-pronged approach and a variety of interrelated strategies that included capacity strengthening, also awareness raising, evidence-based advocacy, as well as sharing of best practices at the national, as well as on the sub-regional level, which is South Asia, because the context is very similar in the countries in the region. So we started by carrying out a study, which is a scoping study among 1,500 women and girls with disabilities, which found like the numerous numbers and like, you know, whereas the forms of violence that were targeted against women and girls with disability. And this study also highlighted a huge gap that is there in the knowledge of women and girls with disabilities. They don't even know what their rights were, right? So, And also there was also huge gaps in terms of services, as well as, again, as I said earlier, in the implementation of laws and policies. And these findings from the scoping studies really informed our course of action, as well as our interventions and strategies. So as I said earlier, one of our major strategies was capacity strengthening. We designed a training of trainers based on a manual which is titled Reclaiming Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights of Women and Girls with Disabilities. And the development process of this manual was very consultative. We actually brought together experts, not just from the country, but also from the South Asia region. In order to develop this, it went through a process of the review, it went through a process of piloting, and it also went through a process of piloting, not just with the experts, but also at the community level. We did a training of trainers so there are more than 30 women and girls with disabilities who have been trained to become the trainers on the issues, especially focusing on the sexual and reproductive health and rights, which also includes SGBV against them, as well as how to do the advocacy. And following the training, there were a group of women and girls with disability who have been formed to monitor sexual violence against WGWD and perform their role as change makers as well. So, and then we also simultaneously worked with the journalists. This is not flexible, so that's why. So we we were also working simultaneously with journalists. So sensitization of journalists was also part of building that support base for our advocacy work. Which led to really these conversations that was taking place, not just on the printed medium, but also in radio and televisions that have a much wider reach of listeners and audience in the context of Bangladesh. This initiative also allowed us to form a committee of women with disabilities and to develop support system to monitor the implementation of existing acts, such as rights and protection of persons with disabilities in 2013, as well as universal rights that persons with disabilities are entitled to under CRPD convention. As part of the advocacy, so what we did was we created some spaces, but also we secured some spaces at the regional as well as at the international advocacy spaces. And most of these spaces that we secured are the intergovernmental spaces. So at the regional level, we organized a regional advocacy dialogue, which was on CRPD, which was held to strengthen efforts to submit a dedicated report to report on SRHR, gender and disability rights in the context of ending SGBV against women and girls with disabilities. And as a follow-up to that, we made recommendations to CRPD committee. And I will just cite one example of the recommendation that is also in line with the CSW this year, which is that the state must increase the digital literacy of women and girls with disabilities and encourage local innovators to develop user and budget-friendly smartphones, apps, as well as the telecommunication devices. On the international level, the concerns and the voices—
If I could just ask you to be wrapping up.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Women and girls with disabilities have also, they are also presented like a voluntary national review of SDGs for Bangladesh at the high-level political forum. And we also ensure that the voices of WDDF, at least the WDDF community, was heard in the Generation Equality Forum process. And so WDDF is one of the commitment maker now, and they're also part of the civil society accountability framework designing process as well. So just to say what were the impact, I mean, I can't really say these laws and policies have changed at this point because it's been just 3 years, but we did start from the scratch. We did start from building this evidence. And we have now support from not just the journalists, but also from police department. There are lawyers who are working on these issues and making sure that the referral systems are better. So we are still, it's still a work in progress, and that's where I will conclude. Thank you.
Thanks so much for sharing your journey from scratch and how you engaged at the wider systems level. around national and international level towards advocacy change. I will now move over to Annabelle. Annabelle, your project in Paraguay focused on women and girls with disabilities from rural and indigenous communities and sought to address violence against the girl child, violence in the community, schools and public spaces, as well as trafficking. We've just heard from Lisa that a key finding of the review was the importance of flexible adaptation and learning as a critical factor in a project's capacity to address violence against women and girls with disability. Your project took place against the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic, which really impacted project implementations and the plans and the results that you plan to achieve. Can you tell us about how the pandemic impacted women and girls with disability in the areas in which you were working and how you adapted your project to respond to this reality? Thanks.
Sí, gracias. Bueno,
Yes, thank you. I would like to give you some context. Paraguay today has 80 family violence or domestic violence reports and 26 children born by little girls and teenagers. And these are only the cases that come to the justice system and the health system. In recent years, we have had 255 feminicides. Several of them include girls under 18. And so the lives of boys and girls in Paraguay does not seem to be a priority for the government. We have legal frameworks that are very good, but there is a chronic absence of budgeting and financing for essential services on the ground. And so that means that the laws really mean nothing. And there is a lack of political will. From the Coordination for the Rights of Women and Girls, we have been working for 30 years in Paraguay, and we have over 29 member organizations. We work to have comprehensive education in sexuality, coordination of the education system and the health system, and we also work to promote gender equality in our community. But we can't do that by ourselves unless the state creates a change to be effective in prevention, services, and protection. Otherwise, we will always be late to prevent violence. The Paraguay project includes the rights of girls and teenagers with disabilities, and that was funded by the Trust Fund. It raised awareness in hundreds of people in local governments mostly, and this is key. Working with local civil servants at the local level, the educational system, civil society organizations, groups of boys, girls, and organized groups so that they are recognized as individuals who have rights. They can demand their rights and they can demand better living conditions for all people with no discrimination. The project started in 4 states, but when the pandemic hit, we had to ask ourselves what we were going to do. And as a result of the virtuality that we had to go through, we were able to get to the entire country, to all 17 states in Paraguay, with training actions, providing key information to local servants, civil servants at the municipalities, fostering the reopening of services to protect children that had been closed locally at the beginning of the pandemic. We have also worked very hard to advocate for a protagonic role of boys, girls, and teenagers, and to make sure that they are included in a dialogue process with their peers. As a result of this, what we did with our organizations is that we created work approaches, work methodologies for this work. We prepared a report about the situation of caregivers of boys, girls, and teenagers with disabilities. And this report indicated that all the caregivers were women, mothers, mostly unemployed, in a situation of social and financial vulnerability, with no support from the state before, during, or after the pandemic. And that means that Paraguay needs to build a public policy of caregiving. The pandemic hit more seriously or affected more seriously girls and teenagers with disabilities in many places. School, which is a key place for caregiving and protection, schools were closed during the pandemic, and levels of violence went up in families, in communities. So we have to work a lot harder. We have a lot more work to do to show that girls and teenagers with disabilities exist. We had a campaign that was called Here I Am Here, to visibilize that women, girls exist, that they have disabilities, and that the state and services have to provide better services to this group of the population. Our state knows that being a girl living in poverty in a rural zone, or being part of an indigenous community, or having a disability increases the condition of vulnerability in the face of several types of violence. And still, our authorities in Paraguay do not take seriously their responsibility to prevent, provide services, and protect against gender-based violence. In the civil society, we are working to continue to advocate so that the legal frameworks become a reality, and so that women and girls with disabilities and without disabilities may live a life free of violence and poverty in Paraguay.
Thank you so much, Annabelle. It's really impressive to hear how your organization was able to assess and respond to the needs of the communities you've worked with, and really pivot activities towards response with such agility, ultimately taking advantage of the focus on the virtual space to expand the reach that your project had. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you all for sharing your experiences and raising some really critical issues. And we'll now move over to the Q&A section of this event. To start us off, we're joined by Diana Dalton, Head of the Gender and Equalities Department at the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, who would like to make a contribution to the discussion. Diana, if you're here, please do go ahead. Thank you.
Can you hear me okay?
We hear you well. Thank you so much. Do go ahead.
Oh, here we go. I just need to start my video. Apologies. There we go. I'm in the office today, so apologies if there's a little bit of background noise. But I really appreciate being invited to join that, and it's been really, really informative. I've been invited to say a few words as an early responder in terms of what I've taken away from that. So thank you very, very much. And I'll try not to talk for too long, because I'm sure lots of people have got questions. The UK has actually been a long-term champion of the UN Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women, including supporting this specialist window on disability, which is a priority for us. So it's really brilliant to be able to hear in much more compelling detail just what's been tested out and achieved on the ground through that window. Last week, we published our new International Women and Girls strategy, and that has as 3 thematic priorities, 3 E's, which is educating girls, empowering women and girls, and including championing their health and rights. And most relevant to this discussion is the E on ending all violence against all women and girls, including those living with a disability. And the strategy also, in a very relevant way, commits us to increasing our support for and engagement with women's rights organisations and movements. But we also have a commitment to work with more DPOs through other streams of work on our disability programming. So it's highly pertinent to all of that to hear from you today. We've obviously heard about the scale of the problem today, and research under phase 1 of the UK's What Works to Prevent Violence programme certainly confirmed the increased risk for violence amongst women with disabilities, who are 2 to 4 times more likely to experience intimate partner violence than women without. So it's really encouraging to hear about not only the proven impacts, but also the learning coming out of these projects funded through the window. In terms of my particular takeaways, I was really pleased to see that the research proves the criticality of the involvement of local DPOs and the direct engagement of women, girls and boys with disabilities themselves. And the peer-to-peer communication as part of the solution is clearly being recognised. We're very focused on that link between grassroots advocacy, discriminatory laws and practices, and that's obviously something that's also come out today. So I'm really keen to learn more about the means through which you tried to influence discriminatory laws and practices, because obviously that sits very much alongside the work described today to tackle social norms, including addressing the issues of denial and building the confidence of the women and girls with the disabilities to speak out for themselves and obviously participate in really key conversations about response. I took away the points about the learning required across those responsible for response and prevention, government actors, other organisations, and the need to look at them together, along with the training that is quite clearly needed to assist them to work in the right way. So it's very good also to hear about the trainers, the women with disabilities who are becoming trainers themselves, and that coming through the pipeline. And also your point about the careful management and protection of evidence that, if lost, leaves individuals who are victims of violence increasingly vulnerable. So I can see the importance of learning about that, and certainly sharing information to other actors who need to play a similar role. And then finally, I just want to say that something about the adaptation, the ability to adapt. It is possible to do this. We've seen that ourselves with one of our disability inclusion programs. It works across 5 countries, and it pivoted really effectively during COVID to provide support. That wasn't obviously initially what it was set up to do, but it was in a really good position to be able to provide different services, access to appropriate information, access to vaccinations, and also raising awareness around the heightened risk of those with disabilities to the harmful impact of the virus. Through the second phase of our What Works to Prevent Violence program, which I hope you do, I mentioned earlier, I hope you do know of, and if you don't, please do search it up and learn about it. We will be piloting and evaluating innovative approaches to address the risks of violence faced by women and girls with disabilities, and we're really committed to growing the evidence base in this important area. Obviously, we need to ensure that they are fully informed by what's been achieved through this window. So I'm going to finish there, but thanks so much again for letting me say a few words and for organising the session today. Thanks.
Thanks, Diana, so much for being with us today and for sharing your reflections. And allow me to just use this opportunity to express our really deep appreciation to the government of the UK and indeed other partner UN member states who've made this work possible, not only with generous contributions, but also with the advocacy efforts to keep the requests of women and girls with disabilities on the agenda of the international community. Thank you so much. I believe that we also have another question online, which is coming from Gordance. So Gordance, do you hear me? I don't know if we're having an issue connecting Gordance to the call.
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, you're here. Wonderful. Hi, Gordance. How are you?
Hi,
I'm afraid we're
fine.
running out of time. I'm sorry about that. So
That's
we'd love
okay.
to hear from you. And if you could keep your remarks fairly brief, that would be great. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. My Organization of Women with Disabilities is also grateful to the support we have been receiving from the UN Trust Fund, because this was really, really very helpful as a small organization of women with disabilities, because we're able with the fund to increase our outreach and the coverage, where today 21% of our current target group 13,000 girls and women with disabilities was increased just because of the funding. But also we were able to extend our partnership with the other stakeholders as an entry point for advocacy for disability and inclusive gender-based violence, prevention and response, where we're able to serve different girls and women with disability to access justice. In another way, we're able, it was an opportunity to build credibility and trust for a small organization, commonly known as a small, with limited access to other funding. So this was also important. But also we're able to respond to institutional challenges that are mostly not tackled by other donors because of the core fund for small women's organization, but also the self-care small women organization fund that was part of the UN Trust Fund grant. And of course, we're able to opening up new opportunity for girls and women with disabilities who participated in our program in terms of leadership, in terms of economic opportunities, where we're able to have 40% of girls and women with disabilities representative on the structure of person with disabilities as a council. And this was a result of the program that we were able to implement with the funding. And lastly, we are grateful to the flexibility and adaptation with the funding that we're able to respond to the COVID effect, just because UN Trust Fund was flexible to adjust, but also adding more funding that we're able to establish toll-free to continue supporting girls and women with disability and introducing technology, smartphone for volunteer to continue responding to the issues even during the lockdown. So we are really very, very grateful to the funding. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gordon, for joining us today, for sharing your experience and providing a picture of how this funding has been used.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you so much for your questions that I know are coming in online, and I'm so sorry that we don't have time for more discussion. That we're really keen to continue this conversation on Shine, our virtual knowledge hub, where we've just launched an online dialogue between practitioners on programming to end violence against women and girls with disabilities. Please do engage with us on Shine. You'll find a link in the chat right now where you'll be able to sign up. That's all from me, except to thank again our wonderful panelists for taking the time to share their insights and experiences today. And I will hand over to Abby for a quick wrap up. Thanks so much.
Hello? Okay. Thank you, Anna. And I think we need to make these 30 minutes longer because there's so much rich information that we've heard. And I just feel like so much dialogue to have with everyone. I do just want to thank all of our partners who are here today and of course online for the really compelling interventions that you made and also the work that you and your organizations do every day to support ending violence against women and girls. So thank you very much. I also, Dr. Lisa, thank you to you as well and to all of our partner organizations that participated in the research. And thank you so much for the very concise, overview of the findings. I mean, I think there's just a couple of things I want to say. I mean, one, I want to just reiterate the trust fund's, absolute commitment to working in collaboration with civil society partners and really trusting equal and respectful partnership. That's so important for us. And I really just want to highlight and lift that point up. I also want to say for 27 years, our mission at the Trust Fund has been to end violence against women and girls with all of our partners. And this has not changed. And this will not change until we live in a global world where all women and girls live safe, free, equal, and empowered. I've been told to keep these remarks very brief, so I won't share, maybe I'll just share one takeaway. And I just want to perhaps lift up the point of, the interconnectedness of all of this and what you shared about the confidence, and the work at that individual level. And also I'm a social worker, so my whole career has been casework and social work, not dropping cases, and the importance of then working with the system and the people around individual women and girls, and the process of through that empowerment and strength that then comes with advocates who can hold national governments accountable to be able to say, we might have laws and policies, because we hear this all the time. Laws and policies exist, but where's the implementation? Where's the actual resourcing to support the laws and policies that do protect women and girls? And so I just want to highlight and lift up that this work, as we know, is so interconnected. It's so intertwined. And at the most fundamental level is really the recognition of our humanity and the brilliance of women and girls. And in this case, women and girls who are living with disabilities and caregivers. Also, I think the point as well around, those who are within the family or the broader societal system, and having their voices heard and creating those avenues for advocacy to hold all of us accountable for, our commitment to leaving no one behind. And so I just really want to thank everyone. You were so inspiring, and really grateful for all of you in the room and everyone online for being here. Thank you.